Ukraine has been trying to regain Crimea since it was annexed by Russia in 2014. However, Ukraine as a whole has been on the defensive since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year. However, on April 22, the Ukrainian army had forcibly crossed the Dnieper River, recaptured the town of Oleshki near the Antonovsky Bridge, established a bridgehead here, and has been advancing on the E97 highway. What is certain at present is that once the Russian army cannot regain control of the Dnieper River, it will fall into a passive situation for the Russian army, because it can directly lead to Crimea from here. Currently the Crimean bridge itself has been undergoing repairs. Therefore, it is difficult for Russian reinforcements to transport a sufficient amount of support through the Crimea bridge. In this case, the Russian army can only mobilize troops from Zaporozhye to support it. However, this would cause Zaporozhye's troops to be empty. Therefore, the current situation has become very unfavorable for the Russian army. In this regard, Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner's mercenaries, publicly stated that Russia needs to adopt a solid defense to keep the areas it currently controls and prevent the Ukrainian army from finding a breakthrough, because Ukraine is trying to tear apart the defense of the Russian army. Especially in the Crimea region, Russia needs to be prepared to ensure that such a thing does not happen. On April 29, Ukrainian President Zelensky said in an interview with the Finnish Broadcasting Corporation that I believe that the Ukrainian army's counterattack will be successful, and we will be able to repel the Russian army and regain the Crimean Peninsula. Of course, Ukraine's success will depend largely on Western arms supplies. If we don't get advanced weapons in sufficient quantities, this conflict could last for years or even decades. If Western countries do not provide corresponding help, Ukraine will rely on its own existing forces to launch a counterattack. The people of Ukraine have already suffered from Russian aggression and threats, and we will not allow this to continue. Just after Zelensky finished these words, all large Russian state-owned enterprises and branches in Crimea, including the Russian National Bank, received evacuation notices. The notice asked senior executives and family members of Russian nationality to prepare for evacuation. The pro-Russian Crimea radio station also released a broadcast message calling for the withdrawal from Crimea to the Russian mainland as soon as possible. In response to Ukraine's possible counterattack at any time, the Russian army has dug a large number of trenches and tank traps on the road to Crimea. However, it is really hard to say whether such a crude line of defense will work. Regarding Ukraine's upcoming counteroffensive, at the hearing of the U.S. House of Representatives Armed Services Committee on April 26, NATO Supreme Command Commander and U.S. Army General Christopher Cavalli said, in the counteroffensive, repeated military flag deduction shows that Ukraine army will be in a favorable position, although the number of Russian troops on the front line is far greater than the number of Ukrainian troops. However, as the elite troops, including special forces, have been exhausted in the early battles, a large amount of main battle equipment has been lost, and there are problems in logistics, intelligence and command. The combat effectiveness of the Russian army has been seriously degraded. The only exception so far is the relatively small loss of the Russian aerospace force, which still has at least 1,000 fighters available. Cavalli stressed that NATO's military assistance to Ukraine is still focused on anti-aircraft weapons. In the past battles, the Ukrainian army's Soviet-style anti-aircraft weapons have almost been used up. However, NATO member states are continuing to assist various types of air defense weapons, and are capable of supporting an effective air defense network for Ukraine and the frontline Ukrainian army to ensure that the Russian army will not seize air supremacy. At present, Ukraine is transitioning to Western weapons systems, which also makes Ukraine more dependent on Western military support. Judging from the Western weapons that Ukraine has acquired, the biggest factor hindering Ukraine's counterattack is that Ukraine has not yet obtained a sufficient number of fighter jets. Especially now that Russia has deployed a large number of fortifications in eastern Ukraine and the road leading to Crimea, which will slow down the progress of the Ukrainian army and will cause Russian aircraft to attack those ground forces that are making slow progress. In order to cover ground forces from attacks, the currently very weak Ukrainian Air Force will have to fly a small number of old fighters to provide cover for ground forces. But these old fighters are simply unable to resist the various fighters installed by Russia. Therefore, the outcome of this war depends largely on whether Ukraine can obtain enough air firepower. NATO Secretary-General Stoltenberg also stated on April 27 that NATO member countries and partner countries have provided Ukraine with 1,550 armored vehicles and 230 third-generation main battle tanks, and more than 98% of their commitments have been fulfilled. Stoltenberg also said that NATO has completed training and equipped more than 9 new Ukrainian armored brigades. These 9 fully NATOized armored brigades consist of more than 30,000 soldiers. These new armored brigades will form the core of future counteroffensives. In addition, NATO is also training more Ukrainian soldiers to ensure that Ukraine can win the battlefield as soon as possible. In addition, NATO members will continue to provide Ukraine with more air defense systems and artillery, as well as fighter jets including the MiG-29. Prior to this, on April 21, Stoltenberg once again stated his attitude towards Ukraine's accession to NATO when he attended the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group meeting at the Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. Stoltenberg said that, as I said yesterday when I met with President Zelensky in Kiev, Ukraine will definitely be in the NATO family in the future, and all NATO members agree that Ukraine will eventually become a member of NATO. Our particular focus right now is ensuring that Ukraine can prevail over Russia. We also need to make sure Ukraine has a deterrent to prevent new attacks. We need to discuss the future security architecture of Ukraine. Therefore, NATO members are discussing the supply of various types of aircraft to Ukraine. In this regard, the Russian State Duma responded that Russia will not allow or tolerate Ukraine's membership of NATO. We must know that for Russia, Ukraine's joining NATO means a permanent military threat. Russia will not allow or tolerate such a thing to happen. Here we would like to remind that Finland has the longest border with Russia. The Russian-Ukrainian war successfully pushed Finland into the arms of NATO. In fact, in fairness, this war has lasted for a long time and has caused great harm to the two countries and the two peoples. Although Ukraine and the international community are full of confidence in the Zelensky government, Russian President Vladimir Putin promised 23 years ago that, "Give me 20 years and give you back a strong Russia." The values of Zelensky and Putin are colliding. In one sense, Putin is a bit like a modern-day czar. His pursuit not only achieved unprecedented isolation in the international community, but also caused irreparable losses to countless Ukrainian civilians. Even if Putin defeats and annexes the whole of Ukraine, will Ukraine willingly join Russia? This episode of the program is here. If you have different views on the content of this video, you can also leave a message and discuss it in the comment area below. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.